Prepare yourself for the terror. The prison of madness, where few enter and none return.
Welcome to Unsung Horrors. With Lance. And Erica.
Leave all your sanity behind. It can't help you now.
Welcome to another episode of Unsung Horrors, the podcast where we discuss underseen horror movies, specifically those which have fewer than 1,000 views on Letterboxd. I'm Erica.
I'm Lance.
And this episode, we have a special guest with us because we are going to be diving into our first Indian horror film, specifically a Bollywood film. So Josh Hurtado is here. Welcome, Josh.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
So, Josh, you are a film reviewer. You've got words at Screen Anarchy. You've programmed films for Fantastic Fest here in Austin. And you also run Potentate Films. Now, I have to ask, is this a Cramps reference?
It is. No one's caught that yet, so congratulations.
Yay!
Nice.
I did it. Lux approved.
You get a new car.
Aw, yay. But I think what a lot of people, especially within the last year, have started to recognize your name and associated it with being a fan, not just of Indian cinema, but specifically Telugu films. But RRR really is what I think a lot of people have come to associate you with more recently. And I got to say, anytime I saw anything about RRR in my feed, it was Josh tweeting it or retweeting it or something. And I thank you for it because honestly, and I think a lot of people know this about me, I don't like new movies. I tend to stay in like the 90s and earlier, even in the 90s especially.
Yeah, you shit on the
earlier.
90s a lot. So
I do. Okay, fine. 80s and earlier. So for me to finally be convinced to watch a new movie and then to experience the joy that is this film.
yeah, absolutely.
Just thank you a million times, Josh, for flooding my feed.
It's my pleasure. I mean, part of it is advertisement for myself, but I couldn't have picked a better film to sort of launch a new company with.
Absolutely. Now, Lance, you just watched RRR recently.
I did for the first time. Yeah, I put it off way too long. Any listeners out there have not watched it yet, you have to. And it was just like you said joy, pure joy. That's what it is. It's just, I had a smile on my face the entire time I was watching it. So touching, just building up friendship. It's a positive movie with very touching moments.
Yeah. We're going to talk about another really good friend in this movie that we're going to be discussing later. I did want to pick your brain about one other thing related to RRR, though, Josh.
Sure.
And I'm not sure if you're at liberty to say if there is, but are there any rumblings of a physical release for it?
I wish I could say yes. I
Okay.
wish that I could intimate any sort of details that I have any backing, but I have no such thing. I've been trying since pretty much day one when we started working with the team in India, and it's very complicated rights-wise. So
that makes sense.
It may happen sometime in the future, but nothing's on the cards right now.
Okay. So you were recently talking about the film on a Twitter Space discussion with Cinema Ada, and you had said, a rising tide lifts all boats. So in this context, meaning that the success of RRR can lead folks to discovering more films, not just from the director or the actors, but from a country like India in this case. So before we get into the film itself, which is Purana Mandir from 1984, we're going to start with a more generalized discussion of Indian cinema, then narrow our scope down to the Ramses, and then get to the specifics of and our thoughts about Purana Mandir. So to begin, I think there should be some clarification for our listeners about the Indian film industry, because when we, as Americans or hi Canadian listeners, think about our film industry, we say Hollywood. And that one word is sort of all encompassing of the American film industry. And I saw a lot of people calling RRR a Bollywood film. I think even savvy folks like Scorsese did, if I'm not mistaken. So Josh, can you correct them and give kind of a brief overview of the different film industries in India?
Sure. So India is a huge and hugely diverse country. There's 1.3 billion people. There are 28 states. There are hundreds of spoken and written languages that have lived there for thousands of years. And one thing that differentiates India as a nation from a place like the United States, where we have 50 states, if you go from one state to another, you can communicate with people. But in India, that's not necessarily always the case. And so they have these individual film industries in each of the states, in each of the different language groups, all with their own production companies, filmmakers, producers, stars, actors, musicians, cultures. All those different sorts of things are really localized to a degree that we don't see over here. So it would be sort of Bollywood is, and I have come to the point where, having read it so often over the last year and a half, that I'm a bit more forgiving of it being, everything being sort of referred to under that one umbrella. It's just because it's the way people think of it. Mm-hmm. But also with the idea that, okay, here's an opportunity to educate. That Bollywood is this overarching term that really, even in India, only ever referred to sort of the mainstream Hindi language film industry, which is based in Mumbai, or what would have been Bombay, hence Bollywood back in the day, mm-hmm. and was sort of the most popular film industry in what are considered the northern states of India. But there are also film industries in the Telugu language, which is what RRR was a part of, was a Telugu language film. That industry centers around the two states of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. There's the Tamil language film industry, which is in Tamil Nadu. There's Kannada language, which is based in Karnataka. There's Malayalam, which is based in Kerala. There's lots of different film industries. All have their own stars. They very rarely cross over to each other, except in really big instances like RRR, where they'll grab a big star from one territory and put them in this other, what they call regional films. Anything that's not a Bollywood movie has historically been considered a regional film because it was made to service this one particular region of India. And I mean, the boundaries are starting to blur a bit with the rise of what's been called pan-Indian films, which the director of RRR, S.S. Rajamouli, sort of introduced the concept of the pan-Indian film with a film called Bahubali: The Beginning back in 2015, which is a big sort of like sword and sandal style epic action fantasy thing. It's great. And it was the first film that really made an impact across every part of India, a huge impact. And then the sequel to that, Bahubali: The Conclusion in 2017, is still the highest grossing Indian film of all time and one of the highest grossing non-English language films in the world. I think it made like $250 million worldwide.
Oh, wow.
And even if you look now, like RRR has this huge cultural footprint in the US at this point, but RRR still didn't make as much money in the US as that film did. That film cleared about $20 million, and RRR is sitting around 15. And on top of those are the big industries. And then there are the smaller film industries from smaller states or smaller language groups. Like there's a northern state called Assam that has the Assamese film industry. They don't really have a nickname for that one. Bollywood kind of goes with Hindi language. Tollywood is what they would call Telugu language. And there's also a Tollywood that is Bengali language, which is confusing.
Yeah.
There's Kollywood, which is the Tamil film language. There's Mollywood, which is the Malayalam film language. There's Sandalwood, which is the Kannada language film industry. And then there are others, Haryana, there's Punjabi films, there's Oriya films. There's all these different language groups that all have their own independent film industries that don't really interact with the rest of the country. So calling it Bollywood it's an easy catch-all, but even in the current Hindi language industry, all of these sort of Hollywood nicknames have really fallen out of favor because they just feel like it's derivative. Like they aren't a part of Hollywood, they are their own thing. So having traveled with Rajamouli a bit over the last year, and even he sort of cringes at the word Tollywood, even though they do try. We always try to make sure that people know that this is a Telugu language film. It's not a Bollywood film, but he just wants to call it Indian cinema. Let's just all call it Indian cinema and be done with it, because it's very difficult to sort of put it all into one basket like that, because there's just so much of it. Yeah,
I'm trying to think of another country that has as many different languages that, it's such a unique situation.
India seems like more than just a country, but like its own world. Like there's so much going on, which is just fantastic. Like instead of states, it's almost like different countries, like continents. Like it's a lot going on.
It is. Absolutely. And there are even films in India that some of the more serious films, and not the stuff you necessarily usually talk about on here, but there are films. There was one from a few years ago called Visaranai, which was India's Oscar submission from 2017, I want to say, which was about migrant workers moving between two neighboring Indian states and how just making that transition from one state to the next, language is different, culture is different. They can't understand this. That person ends up going to jail and can't get out because they can't communicate, and they're treated as less than as migrant workers moving from one state to another. So there's a lot going on in India, and I think that's one of the reasons that it hasn't been explored quite as much as people who, like yourselves or like me, who are sort of ravenous film consumers. It's difficult to find a place to sort of step in because you're going to just be bombarded with all these different ideas and cultures and things. And there's no like one real good entry point until like RRR, I think is a pretty universal film.
Yeah, I agree. I think I do agree it's a good entry point. And I do think, though, something that got me thinking is a review of Purana Mandir from Justin Decloux from Gold Ninja Video and the Important Cinema Club. I'll get to that in 1 second. So the Bollywood box set has disclaimers on all of the films about the lack of adequate storage and elemental damage. There's so many films made per year. They're not that weren't adequately stored. And so you're dealing with a lot of damage. And you can see that in the films. I watched 5 out of 6 of them in the set so far. But that doesn't necessarily detract from your viewing experience of them. What Decloux says does detract from it in his review. He said, the thing about these Indian films is that none of us are consuming them in the proper context. The cinema with a rowdy crowd and an interval. Watching them at home is akin to eating an entire buffet alone. You can do it, but eventually you'll get tired. Can you talk briefly, Josh, about your experience, especially in the last year of kind of touring around and seeing this film in the theater with a crowd, and like why that's part of the culture of watching these films?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started going to Indian films in the theater about 15 years ago. I live in Dallas, and in Dallas there's a huge Indian immigrant population, has been since before I moved here about 25 years ago. And I just realized at that point that there were these theaters in town that played them. So I would go and see movies in the theater because, when you can, why wouldn't you? And one of the first ones I saw was a film called Entharan, which is a Tamil science fiction film starring Rajnikant, who's one of the biggest stars in India. And it was a big deal. It was my first time going to see a South Indian film in a theater. And I'd seen a couple of Bollywood films before that in a local theater. This was just slightly out in the suburbs, where the Indian population mostly lived. And it was like a concert, like it was like a rock show. It was like going to a packed club. People were cheering the whole time. There was confetti flying all over the place. There were people dancing in the aisles and running around. And I thought in that moment, like being there and being the only non-Indian person there, apart from my ex-wife who was at the time, being the only non-Indian people in the audience and thinking, I want to do this all the time. I want to keep doing this because this is amazing. Like, why can't all movies be like this? And that sort of set me on this path to just go and find, like, where is this happening again? How can I chase this dragon to find the next great experience? And I've had it a lot of times since then, exclusively with South Indian films. Bollywood films don't really have that sort of rowdy audience anymore, like they once did in the 80s when Purana Mandir came out, or even in the 90s. But the South Indian films have sort of kept that tradition going because the films feel they haven't. Okay. I'm going to try and couch this the most appropriate way possible.
Okay.
Mainstream South Indian film still carries with it the same sort of sensibilities that it did 35 years ago. So the things that you see in the Ramsey Brothers films, where there's these complete detours from the main plot into other stuff happening, that's commonplace. And the current, Telugu and Tamil mainstream industry have a lot of those films every year where there'll be nominally a central plot, but then there's also all these side things happening, comedy over here, musical over there, romance over there, and then action over here. And it's it's because of this idea of the masala film. Masala just means mix in Hindi. And it's a mix of all of the different genres of film because a night out at the movies was a night of family entertainment. So they would have to put something for everyone in the film. So that's why you have all those diversions from the main plot. It's why the films are 2.5, 3.5 hours long. It's because you have to cater to everybody. And Triple R does exactly that. It does it really well. And that's one of the things that I think that Rajamouli has cracked the code that none of his contemporaries have, is that he's able to deliver something that is distinctly Indian and even more so distinctly of his own Telugu culture, the culture he grew up in. But all of the elements that make it so Indian are integrated so well that you don't notice so much. There are these like brief comic interludes in Triple R. There's a sequence where the Beam is trying to woo this woman, and Ram throws tacks out on the road and gives the girl a flat tire so that they meet up with her. And then there's this lost in translation situation. And there's this sort of jaunty music playing underneath it about how he just crippled this poor woman's car. And now she has to go with him. So that sort of comedy is commonplace, but it's quick and it's punchy and it gets the job done. And you have this little romantic sidetrack that is crucial for engagement with the film, and it feeds into the main plot in a way that's a lot more seamless than some of the stuff that we see in things like Purana Mandir. And watching the film Triple R on day one, because I've been a Rajamouli fan for a long time, and so I always just take the day off work because I want to get to the first screening possible, because that's where everybody else is going to be. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that I've learned over the years, is that if you're going to go see a big Indian blockbuster, if you've got it in your head that you want to go see this thing, and nowadays you have to sort of look through all of the listings, like look through Fandango, find the different screenings, look and see what the theater looks like. Is it mostly sold out? Okay, that's where you want to go. You don't want to be in an empty theater with one of these movies, because if it's bad, then you're just stuck with a bad movie. But if it's bad and you're in a full theater, then there's going to be some entertainment to be had at least. We did the encore presentation in June. We got to see people like reacting to the film in ways that I have been used to seeing in what we call Desi theaters, in the theaters where the Indian audiences would usually go. Mm-hmm. We got to see some of that. But then what really kicked it off was we screened it at Beyond Fest in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, in September with Rajamouli there. It was his first trip out to the States in this last sort of cycle. And the audience just went bananas, standing up, going down in the front of the screen during Natu and dancing in front of the thing. And my hands were bruised the next day from clapping and standing up and sitting down and cheering. And I'd seen the movie like 15 times by that point, so I wasn't surprised by anything. But it was like, it's going to see your favorite band and they play all the songs that you want to hear. And then you just walk out just sort of elated, and riding this high. And so we did that a bunch of times. We did it a couple times there at Grauman's Chinese Theater, the TCL Chinese Theater, played it on the biggest IMAX screen in New York City and Manhattan, played it at the Metreon in San Francisco with just packed audiences, and they're all just going crazy. And that doesn't happen for every film. It doesn't happen for every Indian film. Mm-hmm. It's never happened for an Indian film without an audience that is mostly Indian. This was obviously a first-time thing for pretty much everyone. But it's just sort of chasing that high. Like, I want to do that again. I want to keep not only attending these, but being a part of putting these things in front of people, because I love that experience. It is like the best parts of going to the movies is having that experience with a crowd. We can all watch movies, and like he says, you can watch it at home and it's fine, but experiencing it on a big screen in a full room with the interval or the intermission intact is very important. That's one thing that we insisted upon, was you have to observe the interval, not only because it's 3.5 hours, because Indian theaters play these movies all the time. And a lot of times they'll just play straight through. Like, you'll see the interval card and it'll just start right back up again, like you're watching it on DVD.
Oh.
Yeah, which is not great.
No. I gotta pee.
Yeah, and the thing is that the films are designed to break there. And so when you watch the interval on DVD and it says interval and then it goes right into the next scene, there's always a gigantic tonal shift during the interval. And so it gives you an opportunity to reset, sort of ingest all the things that just happened, and then go back in with that same experience. You go out, you get your snacks, you talk to people what you just saw, and then you go back in and it starts all over again. And with Triple R, that was super duper important because there's just so much exhilaration that happens right before that interval that you have to go up, you have to like stand up and get some of it out, like shake it off for a second before you go back in. And I did an Indian film retrospective series at Fantastic Fest back in 2016. And that was one of the things that I insisted upon Fantastic Fest doing was like, if you're going to let me do this, then we need to observe the intervals. Because if you don't, it's just going to be a bunch of people sitting around at 10 o'clock in the morning through 3-hour movies,
right?
Which is, the movies are great, but they're a lot better if you have that breather in the middle.
I think, that element, what do you call it? Masala, the mixing of genres. We talked about that briefly. I think it has that in common with a lot of older Mexican films. We talked about that with Abraham when he came on for our Black Pit of Dr. M episode, where you have to have these elements for the family. You have a little bit of romance, you have comedy, you have action, you have something for everyone, really, because it is going out and it is a family affair. Something, I should have mentioned this earlier, one of the other resources besides Josh for this episode is Shamya Dasgupta's book, Don't Disturb the Dead, The Story of the Ramsey Brothers. So something that Dasgupta had said in that was that you can't scare people for 3 hours straight. They need some relief. So you have to add in comedy, romance, songs, dancing, fighting. And so the Ramseys in the 80s had developed this formula for their horror movies where you make it 50% horror and then 50% everything else is roughly the formula. And I think that that's something that a lot of, and myself included, I absolutely lump myself into that. Western audiences are used to having genre films where we go see something that this is a Western, this is a comedy, this is horror comedy. So I know to expect the blending of these two things. But the tonal shifts, like you had mentioned, they're so much more predominant in films like this that I think it does take some time to get used to it, like you said.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And then that's part of what the job of programming or curation is all about is, I go through a lot of these movies and trying to figure out which ones are going to pass muster with a Western crowd is a huge part of it. Like I can appreciate some of the films that have those wild tonal shifts that are very sudden, but it's because I've seen it so often that I kind of know what's happening and it's not as big of a shock and to me as it might be to someone this is their first film. Like you have to go into the Indian film world with the sort of idea that, okay, if someone's going to come see this Indian film, it's going to be their first Indian film. And so throwing them in the deep end for some of us is fine. Like for some of us, we're okay with just being completely out of our depth the whole time and just trying to catch up. Like I don't mind that, but I know for a lot of people, it's going to be too frustrating to follow, and you'll see even with, I'll go back to Rajamouli. With Rajamouli, his style has evolved. With the Ramseys, their style evolved a little bit over the years. And even just the larger film industry in general, like I said, the Southern industries kind of are sticking to the formula-ish more than the Northern industries are, but they're all sort of, leveling off at this point. I think as the world has gotten smaller with the internet being everywhere and everyone is streaming everything, and, in India even, there are dozens of streaming platforms and all of them, almost all of them have some sort of payment plan that is just for mobile devices because a lot of them only watch movies on their phones.
Oh my God. Wow.
Because it's the only opportunity that everyone has a phone. Not everyone has a TV or all that kind of stuff. But the idea that everyone has all of this cinema, all of this entertainment in their pocket at all times means that those industries have sort of tried to close the gap between what they feel Hollywood standards are versus their own history and their own culture. And so there's been this sort of weird normalization of a lot of Indian films becoming less Indian over time because they're trying to be like, oh, well, we love what Korea is doing. Let's be more Korean, or let's be more Hollywood, or let's be more Japanese, or whatever. And it's turning into a big mush a little bit. It's not always, and some of those advances are good because you get, better effects, you get bigger budgets to do bigger things like Triple R. But it is this sort of weird normalization effect that didn't exist back in the older days.
So going back to, you mentioned a bunch of services, streaming services that like India have. I know that a lot of streaming services, in the States, they get shit on. Like a lot of people like physical media. Some of our listeners in some cities may not have the luxury of like programmed, like repertoire programming of India cinema, seeing any type of films, in their, if they have a rental store or anywhere. Is there like a particular streaming service in the States that you can think of, Josh, that maybe champion Indian cinema a little more? I know like Netflix, they do original Indian films. I'm seeing a lot of stuff pop up on their platform, but I mean, is there anything specifically that you might gravitate towards if you want to really kind of start diving into Indian cinema?
I mean, Netflix is a good choice. They have a huge market share in India, and so a lot of original Indian content goes up there. A lot of older classic stuff from big Indian studios has showed up on there, older, mostly from the 80s and 90s. Not so much horror, but there are a few newer horror films that have been made for Netflix that are good. But one that has a lot of older content would be Amazon. Amazon Prime has, because of the way they're set up, they have a lot of studios and channels and things like that do sort of cater to the Indian audience, because again, they're also an international behemoth. And so they have a pretty big footprint in India, a lot of original content being made for India. But if, when you are on Amazon, there are like Amazon originals, kind of like their Netflix originals, but then companies can just sort of put their stuff on Amazon, like license it, and then they sort of collect payment in terms of minutes viewed, is how it usually works. So a lot of Indian studios will put their things on Amazon, and they'll put entire back catalogs on there sometimes. The thing is that it's very ephemeral, because things will like slide on to Amazon and then slide off of Amazon from month to month, and it's difficult to see. Or they'll be on a channel, like Eros is a big studio in India. They've done a lot of really huge films, and they have their own channel there. But the Eros streaming platform or streaming channel on Amazon, a whole lot of it is unsubtitled. And that's kind of the struggle. Netflix, everything is subtitled, so that's great. But, on the stuff on Amazon, like stuff on Amazon proper is generally subtitled, but the things that are available through channels on Amazon is not always. Hulu even has, Hulu was absorbed a streaming channel called Hotstar. And Hotstar is like the Disney Plus of India. So it's Disney Plus Hotstar in India. So all the Disney Plus stuff goes on to Hotstar there. In Canada, for example, Hotstar still exists as a standalone streaming channel. But in the US, about 2 years ago or 3 years ago, Hotstar was absorbed into the Hulu catalog somehow. So there are hundreds of Indian films on Hulu that never ever show up in anybody's algorithm or any searches unless you search for them manually. And about 90% of it has no subtitles. And a lot of those are even contemporary films, which makes no sense, because any contemporary film that plays in the US at this point is playing with subtitles. It wasn't the case 10 years ago, but now they are. So, there are like Indian specific streaming platforms that are available here, but I stream way too much shit. And so I have all of the usual ones that everyone could possibly have. I have all of those, but then I have like 5 or 6 other that are specific to India, because sometimes there's a movie I want to see that's on one of those channels, And a lot of people don't know they exist over here, because why would you?
Yeah.
Like, what is going to point someone who's not actively searching for Indian content to a channel that only services Indian content?
Right.
And so it's a challenge. Like with Triple R, one of the things that helped us when we first released it was that it was on Netflix, which we hated at first, but ended up working in our favor.
Yeah.
But it's only on Netflix in Hindi. Well, it's in a bunch of languages, but the only Indian language is Hindi. And the original language version is on a streaming platform called Z5, which some people went and, signed up for a pass for Z5 so they could watch in the original language, because some people are like me and we're nerds about that. But then, like, once you've done that, it's like a now what? Like, I've got this thing, but I don't know what any of the stuff on this thing is, except for this one movie. And there are a lot of those kind of services over here. It's one of the challenges of doing the programming work is you want to get stuff at film festivals that the audience would love, but everything releases over here in theaters. It's a big challenge. And if it doesn't, it goes to a platform that is available in the States because there are Indians everywhere. And so they have these services to cater to those audiences that are not in India, are available worldwide. So yeah, I wish there was one place. I'm sure I'm not alone in this, that I was so excited 10 years ago when I cut the cable and was like, now I have Netflix streaming and I don't need to pay for cable anymore. And now I'm paying more in streaming services than I ever was in cable. And that's just compounded by the fact that I have all these very niche services.
Right.
So there's not one. But if you had to go with one, then Netflix or Amazon Prime are two that have a pretty healthy catalogs.
So let's shift our focus here to the Ramseys now. I mentioned as a resource, there are some really great special features on the Mondo Macabro box set. The book that I mentioned earlier, Shamya Dasgupta's Don't Disturb the Dead, he also gave a lecture about them through the Miskatonic Institute. And fortunately, that is a special feature on the box set since that lecture is no longer available online. The book itself, though, I do highly recommend it because it also has a family tree so that you can keep track of who everyone is because it is a big family.
Yeah.
I think another misconception that people have, when it comes to the Ramseys is they just think specifically about two of the brothers, Tulsi and Shyam. And because they were, usually directors do get the most attention, but you have a group of brothers who each took on a role or a specialty involved in filmmaking in order to keep the costs down. Before becoming involved in the film industry, before making films, they had a camera business and they became the Ramseys because most of their clients were British and they're in that previous business. So you have the patriarch. His initials are FU, doesn't mean the same thing here. So the patriarch is F.U. Ramsey. He was the father and producer behind some of the earlier films. And then you have the two that most people are familiar with, Tulsi and Shyam, like I mentioned, as the directors. Both of them also did some writing and editing as well. Kanta was Tulsi's wife, and she also was a producer. Sometimes you'll see KR Enterprises on the credits of the films. That's her. Then you have Kumar Ramsey, who is the main writer. The cinematography went to Keshu and Gangu. And one thing that I thought was interesting that Dasgupta brought up in his lecture and in the book is that they shot all of their films with just one camera.
That's insane to think about.
Yeah.
And I guess it was shot in 16 millimeter because, a lot of the square, the ratio, but using one camera with very little lighting, it's amazing.
Yeah.
How's that possible? It's genius.
I mean, yeah, he even said he was regarded as a genius for what he was able to do with this limitation, which hard to agree on that. Then you have sound design was by Kiran Arjun. I should have apologized at the beginning. I am going to butcher some names in this, folks. I'm so sorry. And Josh, feel free to correct me if I am just way off base on pronouncing any of these.
I may too. So we're on the same boat.
Okay, good. I figured you had more practice than me. So at the very least, we're all in this together mispronouncing folks. So Arjun did assistant directing and writing. And then the sons of Gangu and Tulsi, Deepak and Chander did assistant directing. I don't expect anyone to remember all of that, but just understand that everyone fulfilled their role. And this was mainly so that they became this sort of filmmaking family entity. And this was also to help keep costs down. So they don't have to hire these people outside to do these things. And they applied the same thing to
the cast.
Their cast. So they're not hiring big name actors. They are spending money on other things, though, where it counted when you're making a horror film and when you're making a film in India, and that's on music. We'll get to that in just a little bit. So just a brief history on the Ramsey brothers. Together as a family, they made roughly 30 films, almost all of them horror, starting in 1970, but if you want to call it their golden age, was from early 80s to early 90s, or 1980 to 1994, roughly. Their first film, again, with mispronouncing here, guys, sorry, Doga Zamin Ke Nichi from 1972. Tulsi directed this. It was written by F.U. Ramsey. It was not very successful, and it wasn't until later that the brothers figured out that horror was the best route, and they developed this formula for it. Purana Mandir, the film that we're covering, is really the one that launched their success. There is another film. It's not like, I wouldn't call it a Ramsey Brothers film. It was written by Kumar Ramsey, though. The film is Ek Nanhi Munhi Ladki Ti from 1970. It had a bank robber who was wearing a Phantom of the Opera mask, and that caused the audience to react very strongly to it. So two of the Ramsey brothers were actually in the audience, saw that reaction, and this sort of gave them the idea to focus on monsters in their movies. We already kind of talked about this idea of mixing genres. They knew their audience would be significantly cut by focusing just on horror. So they, of course, developed this sort of formula to incorporate other elements like comedy, romance, songs, dancing, action, fighting. Anand is my boy. We'll get to him later. Oh, yeah. Then in 1978 came The Door, or Darwaza. And I could not find a version of this with English subs, even on my legal adjacent means for my life. I wanted to watch this one. Maybe I'll find it eventually someday. But The Door would give them really the blueprint for the subsequent horror films to follow. And this would lead to many successes, not only for the Ramseys, but for a lot of their imitators. But ultimately, this formula would also kind of lead to their demise because they all followed this same formula. And even just watching the films in the box set, there's a lot of similarities with a lot of them. And Purana Mandir, I think, sticks out the most from them. We'll talk about a couple of the others in the set. But this formula includes a haunted haveli, or a house or mansion, a curse tied to a vengeance, a dungeon or crypt or some underground lair, a large lumbering monster that's near impossible to kill, and an attractive couple who must fight it. They all pretty much have that.
Yeah, and then from what I had heard, or during that special feature, these films were coming out every month. There'd be 2 or 3 of these horror films that were popping out into the early 90s. So yeah, people grew tired of the same movies and being able to differentiate what was happening on screen. Plus, compound that with satellite TV and cable TV moving over, and if they want to watch horror, they might start turning their attention to Western horrors.
Yeah, Josh, out of the box set, there's a few other films that were popular from the Ramsey brothers. There's Bon Darwaza, a 1990 vampire film. Has less songs, but more Friday the 13th score, so good for them. Yeah. Verena, a female monster, which was new for them. That's great. This is their second most successful film. Purana Haveli, 1989. Very little monster in this. Lots of Christianity, which was surprising to me. I wasn't expecting that. And then Takana, 1989. This is another monster awakened vengeance movie. I don't quite remember it yet. The only one I haven't watched. Yeah, I know they all blend together. I watched them close together, so that didn't help. Purana Mandir definitely sticks out though, so we'll get to that eventually. But the only one I didn't watch in this set was Atma from 2006, and the only reason I haven't watched it yet is because it wasn't directed by Shyam or Tulsi, and it's from the 2000s, and I think everyone here knows my feelings about anything post 1990. So. Josh, any of the other films in that set that you've watched and your thoughts about any of them, and any of those stand out as more of a favorite, or any of those?
I mean, the only one in the actual set that I'd seen before was Purana Mandir.
Oh, okay.
I'd seen Mahakal, which is not in the set, but was released by Massacre Video a couple of years ago, which is the Nightmare on Elm Street riff.
Yeah.
With the dream monster with the knife hands.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think the one that stuck out to me most, and a lot of it was stylistic, was Verona, which I knew about, but hadn't actually had the chance to sit down with for a long time. And it's just because there's so much in the film that one of the things I really loved about all of them, and like you said, I did the same thing. I kind of crammed them all, and I was like, why we keep going to this basement? Stop going to the basement. But the production design, all of the sort of artisan creations that make up the atmosphere of all these films in all of those basements and dungeons is so excellent. I think Purana is probably the best example, and it looks like some of the cool early 80s category 3 Tau magic movies.
Yeah.
Where they're in this basement, they all have the wizard and the little cone head minion things, and there's this gigantic bat behind them, and it feels like you're in some sort of dungeon with some Taiwanese wizard eating chicken guts and vomiting them into somebody else's mouth. Like it felt like that. I had the same sort of vibe as some like Hex or Black Magic or
yeah,
or
exactly.
Kind of
I got some of the Shaw Brothers horror, especially from the makeup. It's so effective, and might be the dark lighting and stuff too, but it's great.
Folks, if you want to gear up for Shawgust, watch some of this set or Verena. At least.
I mean, it was cool. I think Verona also had Bobby Lahiri music, and I love Bobby Lahiri. He's like the disco king of India, and he really became famous in the 70s and was composing music up until just a couple of years ago. He passed away during the pandemic. But Bobby Lahiri's stuff is great, and he's mostly known, like I said, as being like the disco king. So he did a movie called Disco Dancer in the early 80s.
Oh yeah.
Dance and all these really not Omnisomnia, but a bunch of these like dance movies. And he was known kind of for taking what was popular in the States and then tweaking it just enough to make it a hit in the US. And so something like this is a little bit of a tangent, but in his music for Disco Dancer, one of the biggest, most popular songs out of there was actually a very blatant rip of Video Killed the Radio Star. Which it starts off with that, the whole the whole thing, and then it goes just straight into a disco banger, like for the next 7-8 minutes, because that's how they do. And that I liked about it. The female monster was really cool. I feel like this was also probably the horniest of the movies. They all are slightly horny, but Verona really took it up a few notches.
I had a question about the music. Like you're talking about the Disco King and Video Killed the Radio Star. Like the Mahakal and the Bon Daraza Friday the 13th theme, the Nightmare on Elm Street Freddy theme is definitely prominent in that movie, Mahakal. But were there ever any type of lawsuits or legal actions against filmmakers, or is it just like open domain, like they can just do what they want?
Not really, because they were doing it all inside of India, and there wasn't really, first of all, awareness of this kind of stuff from the people that were producing the stuff overseas. And also just not really a market. It would have cost more to prosecute than it would have just to ignore. Again, it's one of the things that has sadly sort of fallen away as time has gone on, because the world is so much more interconnected that you can't really get away with that anymore.
Right.
And I've talked to the guys at Mondo Macabro, over the last several years, trying to sell them on some stuff like, hey, why don't you release this? Why don't you release that? Blah, blah. And they're like, oh, well, we can't. Music rights issues would be, insurmountable and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. There's not really any sort of repercussions for that. Even now that like I buy almost all of my music on iTunes at this point, because I don't have room for other collection of discs. Like I got movies. I can't be collecting records also. And you can still buy them. Like there's a movie from the 70s called Kalapatar, and one of the main songs in the film starts off with Dolly Parton's Jolene. Like it's not like Dolly Parton's Jolene, it's just Jolene. They're just singing Jolene.
So they release these soundtracks?
Oh yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
There you go, Lance.
Yeah. I'm into it.
That's amazing.
And another question, Josh. Do the actors actually sing their own songs throughout most of these? Or are they actual music? Okay. I don't know if any of the actors did or not.
It's very, very rare. It happens, and it only happens when the actor has a very distinct voice. But the audience there is just so used to having these singers singing the songs that it doesn't bother them at all, that they know that they're not singing the actual songs. Someone like Amitabh Bachchan, who's, huge Hindi film star, like one of the biggest movie stars in the world, period. He will occasionally sing his own songs because he has a very distinct, very deep voice. And hearing some other voice coming out of his mouth would be really distracting. But for the most part, they're what are called playback singers. And they're singers that the actors will just sort of lip sync on the set, and then these playback singers will actually sing the songs. The Guinness World Record holders for most recorded performers are Hindi film playback singers, because they've done so many of them. There's people like Lata Mangeshkar, who again, just passed away a few years ago, and her sister, Asha Bhosle, who sang on a couple of these films, who have like 12,000, 13,000 recordings out there because, because they would sing songs for everything, just everything. And the film music is more or less like the central part of the Indian music industry is music from films. There are bands, and the bands do okay, and like pop singers, and they do okay, but the vast majority of record sales in India or streaming or all that kind of stuff comes from film music.
Oh, interesting.
Before we move away from the set, Lance, did you have any favorites from like? you watched
Purana
from it?
Mandir is definitely the favorite. I love Bon Darwaza as well a lot.
He's a great vampire.
Well, yeah, I mean, I want to watch. I was really hoping the set had the 3D Samri in it because I wanted to see more of. I mean, I'm going to butcher his
AJ.
name.
I just call him AJ.
You just call him AJ?
Yeah. Well, that's his nickname, so it's okay.
Okay, AJ, yeah, because he is, I mean, his screen presence is incredible.
It is, yeah.
So anything he was in, those were my favorites of the few that I've watched so far because his monster's so imposing and memorable. Yeah.
So we did already mention, Mahakal. I think that movie, because the audience who's more likely to watch a Ramsey Brothers film is already a horror movie fan.
Right.
And so if you have something that someone pitches to you as this is Bollywood Nightmare on Elm Street, then they have like a point of reference. So it makes it, I think, an easier entry point. This was my first, Bollywood horror movie that I've ever watched was Mahakal.
Mine too.
And I had that Westerner reaction to it where I was like, what the fuck is with these songs? Like, can we get back to the plot? And I was like, why are they picnicking? This has nothing to do with the plot.
Like, I want to go on a picnic.
I know you do. I know. But I want to go back, reevaluate with new Erica, older eyes. Cause it's one of those things where, it's jarring as a Westerner. This is not what I'm used to. And it was off-putting to me. And then I was like, okay, now I understand how this works.
Right.
I loved Purana Mandir. Spoiler, folks. I mean, if you follow me on Letterboxd, you already knew that. But it was jarring for me. There are plenty of others that aren't in the set that I saw as I was going through. A lot of these were mentioned by Dasgupta in his lecture. Obviously, you can go on Letterboxd and look at some of them. But some that he mentioned specifically that I really do want to watch. One was called Dak Bangla from 1987, which is, I guess, sort of a mummy movie. And apparently this has a head exploding scene reminiscent of Scanners, but censors cut it. So I don't know if there is a version out there that you can watch that has that in it, but I would love to find out. 3D Summary, like you mentioned, I want to see that as well.
Yeah.
Dasat from 1981, sort of a Jekyll and Hyde riff. And then they also had their own, sort of at the end of their career in the early 90s, mid-early 90s, the Z Horror Show. Pretty much they were at the end of the making horror movies because audiences had, like Lance said, had grown tired of it. So they did a horror show. It was pretty successful. I'd like to check out a few episodes of those as well. So like I mentioned before, it's sort of there's a few elements that contributed to saying the demise of the Ramseys sounds, like nail in the coffin. It's not, but they were at the height, and what kind of like triggered the sort of downturn for them was a few different things, according to Dasgupta. So the economy opening up in the 90s, cable TV, giving them more options to watch, plus that formula that we talked about, that gave them their success was now sort of boring the audiences. So, and one thing that was said in one of the documentaries on the Mondo set was that Hindi horror started with the Ramseys, had many imitators to the point where the films were seemingly all the same and died out in the mid-1990s. Josh, anything you want to add about the Ramseys before we move on to other crew members in the film itself?
Well, I just want to say, like, the Ramseys are pretty much synonymous with Hindi horror. Like you said, one of the big things that ended up being part of their downfall was that people saw they were making money, and then they started to do the exact same thing that the Ramseys were doing, just cheaper, both in terms of what it cost and also how it looked. And so a lot of the things that are super duper low budget started to drown out the stuff that was actually good. There was also the introduction in the late 90s of multiplex culture, which wasn't really a thing before then. It was a lot of single screens, and a few single screens still exist in Mumbai. And that's a very different thing than going to the mall to go watch movies. You know, I've been to Mumbai a few times, and the last time I was there was actually for the big film festival, the Mumbai International Film Festival. And one of their main venues was just like the bottom floor of a mall.
Oh wow!
It was a very nice theater.
Yeah.
But like in order to go out of it, you have to like walk past KFC. Like it loses a bit of the charm that way.
Yeah.
And there was one theater that I don't even know if still open, but had opened in the 30s. That was one of the big venues. I only went to go see a movie there because I wanted to see a film in a single screen theater, and it was hot as shit because it's hot as shit in India.
Right.
But it was this wonderful, beautiful old theater with like these gloriously uncomfortable seats and this huge balcony, and it was fantastic. And like I imagine in my head seeing one of these movies in one of those theaters. Like that's where I want to be. I don't want to be next door to a dollar store or something like that in a theater. And so that was a big part of it too, is that the sort of homogenization of what we have over here went over there in terms of multiplex culture and just sort of drowned out. They don't really have a lot of, there's not a chain like an Alamo Drafthouse in India. So repertory culture doesn't really exist in any sort of substantive way. And along with that, a lot of independent film culture is sort of tough to find also. So there's a lot of things that sort of contributed to them not being able to do what they did anymore. And, you know, it was all of those sort of aspects that came together to make it really not worthwhile anymore.
Makes sense. All right, so let's jump into Purana Mandir. As of this recording, it has 442 views on Letterboxd. And like we mentioned, it is in the Mondo Macabro box set. Quick film summary. A flesh-eating demon named Samri is accused of raping young brides and killing children. They don't show any dead kids, folks, though. Sorry.
Boo.
I know, right? I couldn't put this in the book because of that. I have a few. There is a Telugu film called Amaru that is in the book.
Yes.
There's a dead kid in that, even though she gets brought back to life. So she gets an honorable mention. I'm spoiling my book. I need to shut up. Okay, back to the summary.
I paid for the Kickstarter. Come on, man. Or whatever, Indiegogo, whatever it is, I paid for it. Come on. Leave some surprises.
Okay, there's 1,200 movies. I spoiled one. Sorry, folks. Okay. All right. So Samri is killed by the ancestors of the Singh family. His head is removed from his body and buried separately. Before his death, he places a curse on the family that all women in the Singh family will die after they give birth. 200 years later, the daughter, Suman, her boyfriend, Sanjay's best friend, Anand, and Anand's wife, Sapta, go to the palace where Samri is buried with the intent of resolving the curse, because the dad obviously doesn't want her to get married, have babies, because that means she'll die. A caretaker and a woodcutter and the mom, who is, they call her dumb, but she's deaf mute. They're all hunting for treasure at the palace. One of them, I believe it's a woodcutter. He's like hunting for the treasure. He's down in the basement, as you do in a Ramsey Brothers film. He becomes possessed and resurrects the demon Samri. Now Suman and her friends have to find a way to defeat it. All right, so getting into the non-Ramsey crew, one thing that I did want to bring up is the effects. So I talked earlier about how the Ramseys did not spend money on big name stars. They spent their money on, it's a horror film. So you got to have good effects. You have to have a good monster mask, because that's going to be your focus of the film. Masks, prosthetics, music, we'll get to that in a second, and your character actors. Christopher Tucker, he's not in the actual film credits, but according to Dasgupta's book, he actually designed the masks for the Ramsey brothers. He wasn't actively working on the films, but he would just get like an order from one of them, and they would describe the type of mask that they wanted, and he would make it for them. He has credits on The Elephant Man, The Company of Wolves. He's uncredited on Dune, Star Wars, A New Hope, and Zardoz. I did throw out my Zardoz love. But yeah, so you've got a very well-renowned prosthetics makeup artist working on a low-budget film. And he was like, I don't even know how they found out about me, but some guy, like Ramsey guy, came to me and said he wanted this mask, and I made it and sent it off to them. So I thought that was great. We did kind of briefly talk about the songs and the music itself. I know, Lance, you love to talk about this kind of stuff, though. So one of the things that Tim Paxton said in his essay that's in the Mondo set, he said that the songs themselves to a Western audience are oddly fascinating, yet often misplaced or intrusive, again, to a Western audience, but that it was box office poison not to have 3+ songs in them. So, Josh, can you talk a little bit about the importance of music in Indian films?
Absolutely. It's, as I mentioned before, film music being one of the main forces in the Indian music industry means that if you have a film, then one of the best ways to promote it is to have good songs. And so those end up being as important, sometimes more important than like trailers and posters. And so even for big budget movies these days, Indians love nothing more than throwing a party. And I'm not going to be, I say this as sort of an adjacent to the industry now. They throw parties for everything. Like everything gets a party. So they have, the first time they have like a still from the film, they're going to throw a big party, or the trailer gets a big party, the poster gets a big party. And one of the biggest ones is the audio launch. The audio launch for a big budget film has like huge stars. They rent out these gigantic halls. They have thousands of fans come in and just cheer and go crazy. And so even in these lower budget films, they need to have that music as a way to sell the movie. And like you said, if you take your family to the film, which even with a film like this, there's still family outings in a lot of cases, and there are no songs, then your wife's going to get mad at you, or your mom's going to get mad at you for making her go see this movie and there wasn't even a song in it. So it's very rare these days, even still as things are evolving, that a film will have no musical numbers. They might be more montagey than they used to be, where the film doesn't just like stop and have a dance.
Right.
But there are always songs in films, and it's not like the U.S. where we have songs in our movies all the time. They're just always like pop songs. Don't necessarily have to do anything with the film. In Indian films, they are loaded with songs that are about the film for the most part. Even if it's kind of a stretch, like all the romantic songs that come up in this one, or the weird cabaret, weirdly awesome cabaret number at the beginning. They're ways to sell. I mean, last night I watched Purana Mandir again this morning, but as I was sort of finishing up, I went on iTunes and just like looked up all the Ramsey's albums and just bought all the ones they had available. Just I love music, and they're like $4 a pop. So I was like, you know what, I can do this.
Yeah, I love that song. That was one of my favorites, like the sappy love song of Sanjay, just like on the beach thinking about his relationship with Suman. Like that's my favorite song, and I love all the song and dance numbers in each of these.
It's one of my favorite things.
I'm warming up to them after this last round of song, and it was almost like the songs were a refreshing break, because I had watched 5 of these plus another one not in the set that all had the exact same score that
yeah.
It's used over and over. It's the introduction of Samri, that score is. I love it too, but when you hear it in every single Ramsey Brothers movie, and I was like, oh, thank God, a song, not the score. Like, I'm a difficult one to win over when it comes to music. So, I mean, I'm stuck in the 70s, 80s punk, and so you throw anything else at me, and I'm not sticking my nose up at it. I'm just being honest about how I feel about it.
It's a good opportunity because these are 2.5+ hours long in length. So it's a good opportunity for me to just get up and dance, get the blood flowing. Sure. Like it's the most like active part of the movie for me.
Okay. Well, you would do very well in a live.
That's what. So. Yeah, Josh talking about the actual physical attending these films in theaters. I would love that.
I mean, and you're Erica. That's me also. Like I come from punk, and it's sort of a weird thing to like end up in this now that I'm in, because it's just like the complete opposite of the Circle Jerk show that I was at last fall or whatever it was. But somehow it's still amazing when something like that happens, or there's a weird song that comes in. Sometimes it's better when it has nothing to do with the film. You know, it's just like this weird diversion where you're like, I'm in a music video now. What happened?
Yeah.
And I love those also. The odd fantasy sequences, like the one where Sapna's trying to get Anand to fuck her, but he won't stop doing push-ups.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And then
Amazing.
that tribe just breaks out with the backwards Halloween masks. I'm like, oh my God, what's happening?
That's so good. I love
so
it.
Great. It's so great. I mean, and there are cultural things that you can point out that don't really fly these days, that have fallen out of fashion, but still exist in a lot of sort of more, I don't want to say base masala films, the stuff that's like lowest common denominator stuff, where if you look at the villains in these films, like they're almost exclusively darker skinned Indians, and all of the heroes are always lighter skinned Indians. And they've kind of tried to equalize that over the last few years. But all the tribals in this one are darker skinned Indians. And, you know, at one point, one guy gets the wig kicked off his head, which I thought was fantastic. It's like a little throwaway moment that you can't really see, but it's amazing.
I mean, if Josh can get there with the songs, I feel like I can get there someday. Just give me more time, folks. All right, let's move on to the cast. And, you know, I know this is going to be an entry point, or close to an entry point for a lot of our listeners. You know, I'll be terrified if we have like experts on Indian cinema listening to this, but at least we have Josh here to, you know, who knows what he's talking about versus me. So if I name a lot of, if I mispronounce any of the names here, I apologize to anyone. I am going to talk about them briefly. We usually go into like other films that they're in, but again, because I think this is kind of new ground for a lot of folks, listing off a bunch of other films isn't going to really help our audience. Also, I didn't watch them, so there's that too, besides the box set stuff. So first, I'm going to go in a different order. I'm going to start with the father, Ranveer Singh. He's played by Pradeep Kumar. Then we have Monish Bell, or Bell. Sorry. He is Sanjay, or the boyfriend.
Yeah, he looks a little like a young Bruce Campbell to me.
Oh my God, he does. You always nail those.
There's always these scenes where I'm like, I bet he was cast because of that. Because there's a lot of talk of them like watching and Indianizing Evil Dead and stuff. But
right. Oh, maybe that's okay. I like it. Then we have Arti Gupta. She plays Suman, the daughter and girlfriend of Sanjay. Preeti Sapruwalia plays Sapna, that is Anand's wife. Perneet Isar is Anand, the best friend of Sanjay. And honestly, he's my favorite in this movie. Like, as much as I love AJ Agarwal as Samri, we'll talk about Anand. I have 2 pages of notes just about Anand. No, I'm kidding. Half page of notes, but still. Speaking of AJ Agarwal, he plays Samri. He's also in 3D Samri in 1985. He is the vampire in Ban Darwaza, which is also in the set. Obviously, the focus is on him because it's, a monster movie. He's in the beginning, not with the monster mask. If you look at like the book, Don't Disturb the Dead, or the cover, that's the monster at the end of it. That's the mask that Christopher Tucker made. He's not in it that much, but when he's on screen, he kills it for me. He absolutely steals it. He's a terrifying monster, this amazing presence on screen.
Yeah, I think they nailed it with the makeup. Like, that's where they spent a lot of the money on, were the effects and the masks and stuff, and it totally pays off. And that's why I think Purana Mandir is my favorite, because he has his own theme that is used in other movies. Yeah. But that theme just, and I don't know, I think it's original to Purana Mandir, but it's, it's like Jason and Freddy, they all have their own theme, so it just works so well. Yeah, like Peter Mayhew as Chewbacca. He was born to play this role. When he gets hairier at the end, when his head is actually brought back to his body, I was reminded of Andre the Giant's Bigfoot character in $6 Million Man, where he has like the contacts. And obviously, Samri's way more scarier and effective. But I just love the hairy body. It's gross. It's terrifying. Like, his monster is perfect.
Hairy bodies are terrifying, folks.
Hey, now.
I'm saying that as someone who's dating a very hairy man. He's got angel wings of hair on his back.
Anand would like to have a word.
That's true. Yeah.
Oh, Anand. Okay, I love him.
He breaks my heart what happened to him.
I know. So folks, we, as usual, we are going to spoil this film. We do recommend you watch it before. You can watch it if you don't want to show up for the Mondo set. I totally get it. It is on YouTube. It's got 10 million views on there. And it was uploaded at 1.2 speed. Thank you, Adam, for figuring that out. Because I was like, why is the version on YouTube like 20 minutes shorter?
Yeah, it's like a 1.1, 1.2 times speed.
Yeah. So you can watch it on there as well. We do recommend, as always, watching the film before getting... You can pause it right now. If you've just been here for getting a primer on Indian cinema, good for you. But we're going to get into this film now. So, Josh, you had mentioned this was a rewatch for you, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how, you had mentioned starting to watch, I mean, I know this is Hindi, and you had started getting into Telugu cinema 15 years earlier. Where did this fall within your Indian cinema film watching?
This actually wasn't that long ago. I want to say 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
Not super long ago. Doing the film critic thing and then doing the programming thing, so much of my time is taken up with watching new stuff and trying to keep up with new stuff that going backwards is kind of difficult. Mm-hmm. And then when you go and consider the fact that India makes somewhere between 1,800 and 2,000 movies a year, the idea of going backwards in that and trying to catch up, it's a fool's errand.
Sure.
Like you are not going to catch up and see all of the Indian movies. That's just not going to happen. And while, I've had these on, I had the old Mondo Macabro DVDs years ago, but I never got around to watching them. I think I'm a school teacher by day. And so this was like a summertime, I have nowhere to go, nothing to do kind of watch. And it was streaming like legit on Amazon Prime one day. And I was like, fuck it. I'll watch Purana Mandir. I don't think they were all there, but I know that one was. So yeah, it wasn't that long ago. Well into my film fandom though.
So what are some things, if you were going to sell someone on watching this film, what are some highlights that you would give to them that you think really make this one stand out? Besides, I know we can sell it to folks by saying oh, this was really successful for the Ramseys and really launched their horror movie career or filmmaking. How would you sell this to someone and really just say it's got this and it's got this and these things are great about it?
I feel like it'll be most successful with people who are already curious or actual fans of international horror and sort of 70s, 80s genre film, mid to low budget stuff. There's a lot of stuff in here that you can connect to other parts of the world. There's this really cool sort of proggy rock score, synthy score thing going on there that feels like it comes out of Italy in the early 80s. There's, like we mentioned earlier, the sort of category 3 sort of witchcraft vibe that's happening in a lot of these films. And the one thing that I'm a hawk for is the fashion in these movies, because the way that Western fashion sort of made its way east over the years, you can see it lags a couple of years and then it sort of morphs into something different by the time it gets the further east it goes. So there's the early 80s, mid 80s sort of fashion that you might have seen in, at one point he's wearing jeans, Anand's wearing jeans and a brown leather vest like he's in the Warriors.
Exactly. Yeah.
The Suman at some point I wrote down apron dress.
Yeah.
Like a blue dress with a red gingham apron right before they get attacked by some people. And one of the cool things, you can tell that Sanjay's a cool dude because he has one of those digital calculator watches.
Yeah, I noticed that.
So I'm a sucker for those little details. It feels like a Turkish movie, the same kind of vibe, or Indonesia or the Philippines or something like that. They all have the same sort of this is what we've seen in Western culture, so we're going to take it and we're going to make it bigger for our. So they take all these fashion tropes and just make them crazy. I love the weird little diversions that kind of make no sense, but then they sort of force into the plot. The entire, and we'll get there, but there's an entire subplot that really makes no sense in the film until the very, very, very end.
Yeah.
And you're like, this movie could have been a half an hour shorter and you could have cut almost all of that. But I love it. I love what's happening in that sequence anyway. Big loud fights. Every punch sounds like someone got hit by a cannonball. Mm-hmm. I love those. I love the ridiculous production design, like that house that they're in. I think it's the same house from Mahakal.
Oh, could be.
With like this ridiculous. It's technically speaking, I suppose, a water feature, but it's a full on fucking waterfall inside their house.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, how could you sleep with that? That seems like
Oh my God, no. Yeah, I couldn't.
At one point, Suman takes a shower in a full one-piece bathing suit.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of talk. I mean, I guess I had this as like a side topic for discussion. Is I assume because of censorship, you're not going to find nudity in these films.
No.
The closest you get is one scene with Anand and his wife Sapta.
She's like grass or hay
covered
over her.
Yeah, she's covered in hay, and that's the closest you get to any nudity. And to me, I was like, well, that's okay for her to be implied naked because they're married. I assume. I'm assuming.
And also, she's not the heroine. She's not the lead actress.
Okay, yeah. So you still have like an element of the same tropes that you get in horror movies where you have the more sexually forward, sex positive character. But I'm assuming there's a lot of conservatism going on there because we are getting a shower scene of her in a bathing suit. Not even just like, well, we'll have a shower scene, but we'll only show her from like the shoulders up. Or from the back, but with no buttocks or something like that. That's the case? I'm assuming because of like censorship, we're not showing any nudity.
Yeah, nipples and anything that you can't cover with a bathing suit are out of bounds with the Indian censor board.
Yeah, I did see like some clear zoom in shots. When Sanjay's got his camera and Suman's coming out of the
pool, in the beginning.
He's like zoom into her boobs and her butt, and I was just like, okay, well, that's about as much as we're gonna get, I guess.
Yeah, that's. I have that in my notes. Lewd pool scene, heaving bosom and the hint of nipples underneath the bathing suit.
Yeah,
with his camera like pointed like straight at her chest.
Of course.
Why else have the camera? I've
noticed a lot of like a commonality between in a lot of Ramsey's horror movies are. Not just them taking showers and stuff, but a lot of characters just getting wet, in bodies of water, singing songs.
It's fucking hot in India.
Well, I get that, but they're fully clothed, like they're wearing their outfits that they have throughout the movie, and I'm just like, that is
well known shorthand. For sex in Indian films, and there's a lot of them they call wet sari movies or wet sari scenes where the love scene will happen as a song with someone in like a white sari just being drenched. They're both just being drenched by a waterfall or something else. And, it's the equivalent of, and they use this also, it's the equivalent of like the train going into the tunnel or, a flower blooming. And they use all of those things too. But the wet sari thing is native to India. And, even in India, even today, big stars, like lead actresses won't wear a bikini in a movie. They might wear like a bikini with a sarong. But no, just like straight up bikini shots. Don't do that. Like that's not a thing that happens. That doesn't mean they don't have the bikinis in the film. It's just a lot of times they'll have like white women in the background of bikinis just to have a bikini in the scene.
Oh, okay.
Which I've always found amusing. Like, where do they find all these white women in these Indian movies? Because there's always a few of them dressed like absolute skanks.
So
good for them. Sex positive.
Exactly. Yes.
Dress how you want to dress.
Everyone dress how you want to dress. You don't want to show it, don't show it. If you do, you got it, flaunt it, do it. If you don't got it, flaunt it. Who cares?
Yeah. Exactly.
So one thing I did want to bring up, sort of towards the beginning of the film, I mentioned that Samri places this curse on the Singh family that any woman will die after she gives birth. Now, my first thought when he places this curse, and let me just say this, first of all, I am not trying to shame anyone who has not read Macbeth. I'm saying that right now. But there is potentially a very easy out of this Samri curse that they would have thought of had they read Macbeth, because if all the women die immediately following childbirth, then all of them just need to get C-sections. That way they are not technically birthing like Macduff and his mother.
Right, but it defeats the purpose of a true bloodline. Like, I mean, they could adopt, but I thought that too. I'm like, okay, y'all are in love. Don't have kids.
I don't mean like adopt. I'm saying like, a C-section is not birthing a child. I mean, I'm sure some like, woman is going to argue with me about it because, you don't have kids. You don't get it. I'm just saying like,
oh, I see what you're saying.
The act of birthing is pushing it out and like, versus like it being cut. Like I think Macbeth taught us this.
Right.
Sorry, that was just like that was my first thought when the curse came up. I was like, okay.
I think it refers to both. Like if you have a child,
All right,
that's
fine,
the curse.
Fine. Fine.
I don't want to
Whatever.
get into specifics here, but that's the way I interpret it.
That's fair enough. So we've got the curse. We've got our young folks that are headed to the palace because they want to break this curse so that Sanjay and Suman can be together and not have to worry about it. Then we're going to get sidetracked for, I don't know, about an hour with other stuff because they're going to forget that they have, when they're not going to forget, they're working on it in the background. You know, I don't want folks to think that I'm being condescending about this film. I fucking love this film. And I'm even going to let Lance talk about the thing that I love most in this film. Lance, tell me all the things that you love about Anand.
About Anand? Okay.
Yes.
Well, the first thing that I'm kind of introduced, like the enigma that he is and like just the powerhouse he is on their way to this, this temple. The car breaks down. And, Sanjay forgets the jack. And Anand like casually says, basically, don't worry about it. I'll lift the car. And it just cuts to them back on the road. Yeah. So I'm like, this is an unnecessary mystery that I am completely focused in on for the rest of the movie. Is obviously Anand has superhuman strength.
Yeah.
I wanted to see that so badly.
Oh my God.
I was like, wait, was there a scene cut? Where's the extra features?
They had one camera. So if you had him on the other side of the car, not like showing him looking like he's holding it up. Right. But you actually do have it jacked up and then you cut to, like you could have made it happen.
Oh yeah. I mean, they make everything happen with just one camera. I mean,
but he has that scene before they even go on their road trip where Sanjay is getting whipped by the cronies of the dad and Anand comes into the rescue and just fucking busts out all these sick fight. Like he just takes all of them out.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I love Anand. He's the best friend ever.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite scenes that I have written down there. It's just him kicking ass and like fighting over the course of like a whole village and just beating everybody down. But yeah, I mean, he's the best. I mean, Josh already pointed out his like warrior-esque brown leather vest. I got to point out that Styles shirt he has on.
Fuck yeah.
Styles, plural.
Yeah, Styles, yes. Yeah. And it's I want that shirt. Like the fashion is off the hook and it's all coming from Anand, if you ask me.
Yeah, it is. When I would get that for you for your birthday, but I already got your present for you. Sorry.
Oh.
But I think one of the things like that really tells you everything you need to know about him is like, before they're leaving on this trip, or no, they're on the road already. They're on the road and Sanjay's like, you know what, you should go back. And I was like, how is he going to go back? You're already like on the road going. Anyway, Sanjay says to him, Anand, why do you risk your life for us? And Anand says, I'll punch you right across your face and break your teeth. A friend is one who can sacrifice his life for friendship.
Exactly.
And I love him so much.
He's the best friend like everybody dreams of having.
Yeah.
Because he does sacrifice himself, spoiler, to save the day. Yeah, when he was killed, I felt that. I was sincerely bummed. And when you watch movies, you do develop relationships with third established characters, but there's time spent on Anand, but it's silly. It's him exercising, it's him kicking ass, and these characters just kind of jump scenes and stuff. Yeah. But I was so just
invested in him. Yeah. I love him. Mm-hmm. Even when he got involved with someone in the side plot. And I was like, why are you doing that? That guy's a rapist. You shouldn't help him. But
I love that character. What is happening? I mean, it probably sounds terrible, but with the bad wig, the bad beard, he reminded me of Robert Downey Jr. from Tropic Thunder. Like, I know it's terrible, but the
okay, I can explain this.
Okay.
Okay, so that performer's name is Jagdeep, who plays the gruesomely toothed leader of the tribal villains that really have no place in the film at all.
Right.
But he's a very famous comedian, and what he's doing is that whole plot line is a parody of Sholay, which is like the biggest Indian blockbuster of all time. He's playing the character as if it were Gabbar Singh, who was Amjad Khan, the actor, who was the main villain in Sholay. And in Sholay, what happens is Amitabh Bachchan and Dharmendra are these two criminals who are being freed from their prison transport to go protect a village, Seven Samurai style, from this character Gabbar Singh, who had done what this guy has done. He'd taken the local village head, who's named Thakur Baldev Singh, and cut both his arms off, which also happens in Purana Mandir. Like it's a very direct parody of it.
Okay.
But they use a lot of the same dialogue from that film. And the reason they do that is because Sholay is such a big hit that everyone knows the film. Like literally everyone. There was one of the most popular records that was out in the late 70s, early 80s was just the dialogue for the film. You could just buy LPs with the dialogue of Sholay on it.
Wow.
And so Jagdeep is doing like a parody of that whole thing throughout the film. It makes no sense until the very, very end of the movie. And he's not even in it at that point anymore.
Right.
And even when he's a rapist, but the old woman who he is raping doesn't seem that bummed about it. She kind of wants the attention. She's cool with the attention.
Yeah.
But it's a weird diversion in the entire film.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what that's about.
I'm not one to victim shame, but she plays victim. She's milking the victim thing.
Yeah, for sure.
So as few Hindi films as I have seen, I have actually seen Jagdeep in another film prior to this, which is Kun Kun, Bollywood's answer to Dirty Harry.
Dirty Harry, yes.
Yeah, and that's in the book too, folks. If you've seen Dirty Harry, that's not a spoiler for why it's in the book. So.
I mean, one thing I love about Jagdeep's character is, I mean, other characters do it, but his delivery of lines straight into the camera, looking straight into the camera. I fall for that every time. I love it. It's delivering the comedy, and it's just breaking the fourth wall in so many ways.
I was disappointed. I mean, I know there has Anand getting involved with this side plot, and then eventually that does come into, the ending part of it. But at first I was like, no, Anand, don't help him, rapist. And
he's getting paid. Yeah.
I know.
He's getting some money out of it.
I know.
I will say, and this is from the 70s forward, that rape was a huge plot motivator in Indian films. It still is in some parts, but I mean, as much as the world balks at it now because it's cheap, it was a huge reason for a lot of films to move their plot forward. If there's no other way, or they get stuck plot wise, they just throw rape in. It just happened.
That feels like a Hong Kong film.
Yeah.
You say it like that. Yeah. These have a lot more in common with Hong Kong films than I had originally thought.
Well, speaking of, I was just looking at my notes also, and since we're in the part of the story where they're sort of traveling, again, with the sort of category 3 witchcraft films, you guys have, because I've listened to a lot of your episodes on these, if you watch enough of them, you always notice that the evil witches are never in Hong Kong. They're always in Taiwan or in Thailand. Mm-hmm. And so they're always traveling or on vacation or going somewhere else. And so the evil stuff doesn't happen at home. So you have your little locale is pristine still. It's when you travel outside of it that shit gets hairy.
Right.
And the same thing happens here. Their home is in Mumbai, but they're traveling out to this rural area. It's the same kind of idea. That you're not staying in your home. All the crazy stuff happens out in the boonies where these hillbillies live.
Yeah, just that rural element. There was something else that Dasgupta had mentioned as well about how supernatural elements are much more believable to a rural audience. And so having it set there can add that verisimilitude to it for an audience where it's oh yeah, it makes sense that out here in this rural part, we have this raping, child-eating, killing demon that is resurrected, and all the townspeople, obviously have it. They come together at the end. Well, I'm jumping ahead to the end, so I guess
it's fine. Yeah,
yeah.
I think I started that. I apologize.
Oh no! We never go in.
Yeah, we're all over the place.
We're always all over the place. So. Josh, you had mentioned the side plot makes absolutely no sense until the ending when it all comes together. Do you want to talk briefly about how those collide?
Well, at the end, it's when they have, because as you mentioned earlier, the way that Samri had been sort of neutralized for the last 200 years until the film actually starts is that his head was separated from his body, and they were in two different places. The head was in this mansion, and the body was buried in a local temple. And when the woodcutter becomes possessed and finds the head and travels back to take it back to the body, that's in the last 30 or 40 minutes of the film where the real Samri action really starts.
Right.
For most of the film, he's just a giant projected head behind a waterfall.
Yeah.
Menacing people. But when he actually starts killing folks at the very end of the film. And at one point, I think it was the caretaker mentions to Sanjay that the only way that they're going to get through this is if he involves the town to help him. And so this is one of my favorite parts. He has to go and like make nice with Bijli, who is a local girl who is the sister of a big shot in town who has a crush on him. And so he has to like sneak out from Suman, because she's already jealous. Having seen,
she's like a water nymph or something like that when she first comes out.
She catches fish with her mouth.
Yeah,
isn't she referred to? And it's probably broken down
Jungle slut.
Jungle slut.
Yeah.
Jungle slut. I wrote it in my notes.
I wanted to preface.
No jungle slut shaming on this show, folks.
No. So he has to like go and pretend to woo her, and she keeps feeding him liquor, and he keeps tossing it out of the cup in order to like woo this town to come help. And so the whole town shows up to kill him, and it starts off with a really awesome song as they're getting ready to sacrifice Suman and Sanjay as a blood sacrifice to kill the monster, which they don't end up eventually doing. But at this point, all of the other stuff has ceased to be of any relevance at all. So the Jagdeep stuff and the armless village head stuff, completely irrelevant. Yeah. It's just that guy's son, who's this like big shot who wears this like dragon vest.
Sick dragon vest.
Pretty sweet dragon. Yeah, very, very drive.
Yes.
Dragon vest. And then they all have to kill Samri together. So that's really the only place where the two storylines collide. Apart from the fact that, he has to go, I guess, pretend to be seduced by the jungle slut.
Yeah. It's like the ending is like so much happens in the end. And like, I just have like bullet points of just like things that happen. And you've got Sapna's death. She gets hypnotized by Samri, and she's at the top of a building. Anytime you see someone on top of a building, hold out for a dummy drop. And of course we got one. I think I already told Matt about the dummy drop. You get more fighting from Anand. Like he fucking pokes some guy's eyes out. I'm like, I love this man. But then he fights Samri so that Sanjay and Suman can get away. And I'm like, come on, Anand, bros before hoes. Like, I hate that saying. It's so dated and stupid. But really, like, if anyone deserved to live, I mean, I know, like, it's basically like a cop saying, like, I'm retiring tomorrow. It's like, okay, you're going to die. And Anand saying, like, I would die for my friends. It's like, oh, no, you're going to die. And I felt it when he died. I was so sad.
It's very sad.
Yeah.
There's the random possessed wheelchair that I love.
I have that as a favorite for sure.
After
That's pretty amazing.
After Sanjay and Suman almost get sacrificed, there's a sword fight. I'm like, where did they get swords from? I don't know. Who cares? I love it. I will say though that they do kill Samri. They get him in a coffin. Suman and Sanjay push him out. The village all comes to help. They all rope him. They tie him to a stake and they light him on fire. And the old man at the very beginning told the king, he's like, kill it with fire. Yeah. That's how you kill everything. You fucking kill it with fire. Like, right. That's how you kill all the evil things.
Even before the ending where he is finally burned, Samri, there's that back and forth between Sanjay and the father where he's saying, give me an hour. And I'm like, wait, no, just burn everything right now.
I forgot about I forgot about the father because the father falls into like a coma at the very beginning, roughly, like right after they leave.
Yeah, he has like a heart attack or something.
And so he's out of the movie for an hour and a half maybe, and then he wakes up at the end and he shows up to get with the crowd and everything. But
yeah, his song was the main reason I asked Josh, and just wanted clarification if actors sing their own songs, because he has the voice of an angel. Like his song, I was like, oh my gosh, this is beautiful. Yeah, some other favorite scenes that I wanted to throw out is when the woodcutter, what's his name, Sangja, when he sees when he opens up the chest and Samri's severed head in there, and he he possesses him, his eyes turn into Large Marge from Pee-wee's Big Adventure. They're just like these big, like Kermit the Frog caps over his eyes, where he's kind of like walking around.
Yes,
like he's in a tanning booth.
Exactly. Yeah, that's. Yeah, no, there's a lot. I keep going back to Samri, of course, especially when he does get connected with his body and he's stretching out his toes and stuff and his long toenails and everything about like that whole scene and him with the bloody neck and it all coming together. And I kept thinking like, yeah, I'm on Samri's side, fuck the rich. Let's destroy this dynasty together. Like, let's do this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not mad at him for his message. Obviously, kill the rich. We don't fuck those guys. But
he ate children. But
I love this man.
There's a lot of positives.
But he killed Anand, and I can't forgive that. So yeah, you got to kill this guy with fire. I'm sorry.
That's true. No, yeah.
Josh, any other scenes that you wanted to mention?
I'll go back to the first cabaret sequence just because I really love the first cabaret sequence, which again plays zero part in the plot.
Of course.
None whatsoever, but it does have some really nice like star filters and bouncing disco music that I always love. There's also, if I remember correctly, there's a lot of advertisements in that bar, like there are in bars sometimes, but one of them is for Thumbs Up. Thumbs Up is the Indian version of Coca-Cola. Oh. So like if you've ever been to like my family, my mother lives in Atlanta, so I've been to the Coca-Cola Museum there. And I think actually the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport has something similar to this as well, where you can just like go around and taste like Coke from around the world. And one of them is Thumbs Up. It comes in these like little skinny cans. It's one of their staple drinks. Again, the fashion in that sequence, her cabaret outfit is wonderful. I'll go back to fashion again for Beachley and her animal print, like mini skirt top thing that she's wearing, I think for the entire film. Mm-hmm. There's just so much fun in this movie. Anand doing everything that Anand does. He is easily the most compelling character in the film. Sanjay he's fine, but he doesn't really do much. There's not much to him. Yeah. There's not much passion to Sanjay.
It's disappointing that he's the hero, It's like, and
Anand is all passion, you know. He doesn't do anything halfway. So those are the most fun parts, I think. Oh, I really liked when they have the flashback of Suman's mother dying. Childbirth. Yeah. And she doesn't just die. Like, you kind of expect her to just be, like, dead. But no, she's a monster. Like, she's full monster makeup. Very gruesome. I thought that was really cool also.
Yeah, that's another scene that really gave me, like, Shaw Brothers horror vibes when she's turned over on her back and her face is all, Yeah. The father's just, like, falling over himself.
I was like... There's another one. I get them all mixed up. I think it was Bewitched where there's a guy in the hospital and like he's turned over, you don't see him, and then you turn him over and his just like stomach opens up and fucking maggots fall out.
Yeah.
But I love this film. Lance, I know I saw your rating, so I know you love it.
I love it.
Josh, you said you loved it, so we all love it. Everyone should watch it.
Absolutely.
If you haven't already.
If you're going to just make sure that you pace yourself between them so that they kind of don't blend together completely.
Yes. Hard recommend on that because I did not do that and a lot of it blurred for me.
Yeah. And I think I watched 4 or 5 and then by the last one, I was feeling the fatigue. I needed to take a step back and, put on like something like Nacho Libre or something bad just to watch.
And if you can, take Justin Decloux's advice. If there is a way for you to watch it with a giant crowd, if for whatever reason, if you're in a city that does any type of repertory screening, or if you live in Dallas like Josh, like seek out those cinemas. If there are Indian communities near where you live, see if there's those opportunities for you to be part of that.
I know these films are doing the repertory rounds now. Some of them are. So
nice.
It's just been in Canada, I think, so far, but they're looking for more homes in the U.S.
Oh,
so
I'd love to see
if you have access.
Films.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to our double feature picks here. Josh, you are our guest. So, what would you pair as a double feature with Purana Mandir?
Okay, so I went through a lot of these, so I'm going to suggest one and then throw a couple of bonus ones in there just because that's...
We usually do that too.
So one of my favorite films that I have been trying to get in front of an audience for a long time is a movie called Kanchana from 2011. It's a much newer film, but it carries some of the same crazy vibes that the Ramses films do. It's a Tamil language film. It is about a man who becomes possessed by the ghost of a transgender woman who was murdered in a hate crime. And as the ghost comes back to take vengeance on those who killed her. there's dancing, there are dwarves, there's cricket, there's decapitations, there's ridiculous broad humor. It's all of the things that make Indian film great. It's one of those it's going to take a minute to figure out like what is happening in the film, but once you kind of get there, it's lovely to just be like dragged along through it, because the violence is very violent. The dancing and the songs are incredible. And the star / director / choreographer / producer / writer is one of the best dancers in all of India. And if you've seen Indian people dance, that's not something I say lightly. And it's a trans-friendly action, romantic, comedy, horror musical that everyone I've shown it to has lost their mind for, but it's a really sort of weird niche thing. It just happens to be streaming on Amazon. So if you've got 2 hours and 45 minutes and don't mind getting your mind blown, it's not a bad choice.
Nice.
How do you spell it, just for our audiences to want to look it up?
Kanchana.
Thank you.
But yeah, that's one I've watched it probably a dozen times over the years, and it there's always something that I've forgotten that happens, and I'm like, oh man, that's amazing. I forgot that happened. Which, after you've seen it that many times, is still pretty amazing. So I went through a few things. There's an Amazon Prime series called Shaitan Haveli, which is sort of it's from like 3 years ago. That's a sort of parody web series or series about this kind of film. Like, it's a filmmaker goes to an old house to film something, and then like actual monsters start showing up and stuff like that. That's fine. It's pretty decent. There is something that came out last year that's really cool called Cinema Marte Dum Tak, which basically means cinema till my dying breath, which is a documentary series. It's fairly short. You could do it in a weekend, about 4 Z-grade horror filmmakers from the late 90s, early 2000s, who were the people that basically put the Ramseys off the business because they were doing it for, a fraction of the money and doing way pervier stuff. Mm-hmm. That, again, the multiplex culture sort of took their business and made them, push them out of the film industry, more or less. But the documentary not only goes into their history, it also takes these 4 filmmakers and gives them the resources to shoot a new, like, 40-minute feature of, within a certain budget range. And you follow them on the process, you follow them, reconnecting with all of their old cohorts, the actors and the technicians, and they talk about their careers and what went wrong and what went right and all the challenges they had with the censor boards and all that sort of stuff. It's really fascinating. And it's like surprisingly emotional. Like, there are a lot of tears in this series. I think it's really, really well done. It was initiated by a filmmaker named Vasan Bala, who made a movie a couple of years ago called The Man Who Feels No Pain, which played at the Toronto International Film Festival, and won the Midnight Madness Audience Award. And it's just a big fan of genre cinema. And so it's a really cool sort of look behind the curtain in terms of what it takes to make a film like that, which ain't much. It's a lot of passion and a lot of fake blood. So those are a few. And then there's a movie called Miss Lovely, which I thought it was streaming on Netflix. It's not there anymore, but is a fictionalized version of a story like The Ramseys. It's about a pair of brothers who make, low budget horror films, and about the controversy and how back in the day they would have to film like hardcore inserts, basically, that they would send their movie to a theater and then they would have to manually take a reel of these hardcore inserts, and then they would just stop the movie, put in this one reel of hardcore for the audience, and then like disappear into the night. So it's a really, really excellent film as well.
Like all of those options.
Yes.
Yeah.
Lance, what about you?
Okay, so yeah, I was thinking, I'm still very new to Indian films. I would have probably preferred to double feature and pair up an Indian film with it. But then I thought, if it's a double feature, I want to pick something a little, probably under an hour and a half to get people just watching. And at first I was thinking of like Diodato's Raiders of Atlantis, or even like Rudy Ray Moore's P.D. Wheatstraw, just because it has every single genre kind of mixed in. Sure. There's so much going on in either one of those. But I'm feeling this is probably a lazy pick because it was mentioned by Tim Paxton in the intro on the Mondo Macabro disc for Purana Mandir. And that is the Spanish film Horror Rises from the Tomb from 1973, which I know you just watched.
Yeah. Directed
by Carlos Allred, who directed Blue Eyes of the Broken Doll, which was my double feature pick for your Dragonfly for Every Corpse. But yeah, this one's written by Paul Naschy. He actually plays 3 different roles in the movie, so that's always a plus when you get 3 John Belushis in there.
Yeah.
But very much like Purana, in the first 5 minutes, it takes place in like late 15th century. Paul Naschy, one of Paul Naschy's characters, is accused of drinking blood, killing newborns, worshiping Satan, killing women, and he's sentenced to death. He's beheaded. His head is buried separately from his body, and he curses the king who's causing this beheading and tells him that his descendants will be cursed and that he will return someday. Then you jump to modern times, just like Purana Mandir. Paul Naschy's back as the descendant of the king. He's Hugo, and he and his friends have a seance where they're told the location of the severed head. Hugo is skeptical, and they all go to his land to check it out. They find a chest. Someone thinks it's treasure, just like Purana Mandir, but it's the head who possesses these people, hoping it's treasure, and these possessed bodies help him locate his body. Again, the similarities are really there, but it's fun to see a Spanish version of it. In classic Paul Naschy kind of screenplay writing fashion, you kind of get this the kitchen sink thrown at you at the end. There's some fun surprises, and yes, zombies, of course. It's Paul Naschy. Zombies and vampires pop up. A lot of excessive laughing. Has a bleeding painting too. Instead of a trident, there's a sacred medallion. I do want to warn people there's an 80-minute version of it on YouTube, it's censored. It takes out like 10 minutes. All the gore, all the nudity's out of that. Yeah. Ew. So again, I kind of wanted to pair something too that had, for like the people that want more of the nudity. And
that's me.
This has it. Has a lot of pipe organ. The editing's terrible though, I gotta say. But it's endearing. Yeah, great cast all around. It is streaming on Shout TV for free right now. Yeah. So yeah, don't watch the YouTube one.
It's also on Plex, but fucking Plex sucks with commercials.
Yeah.
Their ads are just terrible.
Yeah, I don't even go to Plex.
I don't normally, but I was too lazy to hook up my laptop to my TV to watch it on Shout, so I was watching on Plex because I only have Paul Naschy Volume 2 from Shout Factory, and then that one's on Volume 1. So I watched it on there. I liked it. I appreciated Paul Naschy once again getting women naked and him being desirable to them.
Yeah. A lot of rubbing. He does a lot of rubbing in that movie. Horror Rises from the Tomb. What about you, Erica?
So I kind of had the same thought where in my head, I was thinking, if I'm programming this for a Western audience, it's going to be a big ask for me to do 2 Ramsey horror movies back to back, especially because there's so much in common. And that's a lot to ask for a runtime for a double feature. So I was thinking maybe like the Z horror show, like maybe an episode of that, because I picked TV episode for a double feature before. But instead I was like, I'm going to do like what you did. I was like, I'll just find a film with a short runtime, like roughly 90 minutes or less. And I wanted to focus on family curses. So a few that I thought about were Norman J. Warren's Terror from 1978. That's got a short runtime, 87 minutes. It's about the descendants of a witch hunting family and their close friends that are stalked by a mysterious entity. Kwei Chi Hung's Curse of Evil from 1982, 79 minutes. That could be good for folks gearing up for Chagas too. Then I went in another direction, and this is kind of ultimately where I landed, not with this one specifically. And some people are going to hate me because I've picked this director before for a double feature, and you know what? I don't care. The Rats Are Coming, the Werewolves Are Here from Andy Milligan, 1972, was one thought. But I was like, there's an even shorter version of that, Curse of the Full Moon, 1971. It's the unfinished director's version. That's 73 minutes. So Curse of the Full Moon, Andy Milligan. It's about a daughter. She's her family has a curse on them. The great-great-grandfather was bitten by a wolf. So she's in this family of werewolves. Their name is the Moonies, of course. God bless Andy Milligan. So she decides that she needs to put an end to the family curse so that she can live a normal life with her new husband. The movie has a melodrama. It's got a mom who dies in childbirth, a man who's set on fire. I mean, they're practically the same movie, y'all. Like, so yeah, Andy Milligan, folks, for double feature again. I'm trying to get folks on that train.
It'll happen. You're doing your best.
All right, Josh, this has been extremely informative for not just for us, but I'm sure for all of our listeners.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Can you tell folks where they can follow you and all the good stuff that you do?
Yeah, well, for the time being, I'm still on Twitter at Hateful Josh. I'll probably be on the other things once everyone decides which one to go with, because I'm not downloading them all.
Yeah,
same.
And that's probably where you'll find whatever I end up doing with Potentate Films. Right now, we are working on doing some rep screenings for some of S.S. Rajamouli's older films. Those should be seeing some theaters here in the next couple of months. And trying to find the next big thing, or the next thing that can be big, trying to figure out where to go from here. It's kind of a work in progress. Apart from that, you can follow my writing at Screen Anarchy. I'm about to head off to Fantasia in Montreal here in a couple of weeks. So
Excellent.
There should be a flurry of writing about new films, and that's going to be your best chance.
Are you going to be at Fantastic Fest again this year?
I will be there for a few days, yes,
Okay.
And I'm working a couple of angles with that, actually. Which when we get the first announcements out in the next few weeks, you'll start to hear some of that stuff.
All right, sounds great.
awesome.
We'll put links for folks to follow Josh and all the work that he's doing with Screen Anarchy and Potentate Films. Be sure to try to catch a screening of any of the films that he is promoting out there. You won't regret it. Josh, thank you once again for this, and hope you have a great time at Fantasia Fest.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You're listening to the Prescribed Films Podcast Network, home to hundreds of hours of free podcast entertainment. The shows on this network all have a common goal: providing you with the best discussions about movies and other forms of entertainment media. The PFPN hopes to fill your earholes with audio joy. Visit our website with links to all the other amazing shows at www.thepfpn.com. Thanks for listening.
Okay, so it's my next pick?
Yes.
Okay, and I feel like I need to win some listeners back after the Dr. Heckle and Mr. Hyde
Lance,
pick.
everyone loves you.
I received some death threats.
No, you
Erica.
shut up.
Okay, no. I feel very confident with this pick, though.
Okay.
I went straight to a favorite publication of mine, which never fails for recommendations. Bleeding Skulls, a 1990s trash horror odyssey.
Ooh, careful.
Yeah, 1990.
Careful.
Yeah. Well, I'm not trying to win you over. I'm trying to win the listener.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah.
And I'm bringing in a guest for this pick.
Ooh.
Bleeding Skulls' very own Annie Choi will be joining us to discuss Disembodied.
Oh, fuck yeah.
From 1998. It's directed by William Kirsten. And Annie's joining us not because she's she has awesome reviews on anything and everything she's seen, but this was one of her personal favorite picks on our Bleeding Skull episode back in 2021, late 2021.
I feel like it was when
the book came out.
It was like 2003.
It was, yeah.
Because we've been doing this podcast for like 20 years.
I know. It's been nuts.
Yeah.
I'm glad, I witnessed you graduate. I saw you vote for the first time.
I like that you think that 20 years ago I was still under
16.
18.
Yes. Right?
Yeah.
Anyways, I'm just going to take the summary that's lifted straight from the back of the Blu-ray box. It's also on Letterboxd. But this is the story of Connie Sprouts, a likable young woman with a sad problem of a spore-generating deformity on her face, which causes difficulties in her day-to-day life, such as dissolving into a gelatinous mass anyone who is to be devoured by the neural parasite that inhabits her skull. Her skull is empty due to the fact that she stores her brain in a jar beside her bed. And that's all you get.
Yeah.
Okay.
No more.
That's it. It's amazing. We briefly chatted about it on that Bleeding Skull episode, but there's a lot more to talk about. It's currently streaming on Tubi. There is a Blu-ray release from about 5 years ago from Brink Vision. It was mentioned in the episode that there are some edits to these, but so if you can like get your hands on the original VHS, that apparently is the true original version. But the one on Tubi is great. That's the one I watched. It currently has 532 views on Letterboxd.
Excited.
There we go.
Heading back to Bleeding Skull territory.
And the 1990s.
Okay. All right, folks, if you're not already, you can follow this podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter for now. You can follow me on Letterboxd, Instagram, and Twitter for now at Hex Massacre.
You can follow me on Letterboxd and Instagram for now at El Shivey.
All right, join our Discord. Link in our bio thing, please. We haven't had anyone new join us in a while. I'd like to think we have more listeners out there.
We've been on Discord for 20 years, people.
Yeah, we were like beta Discord. Come on, folks.
Yes.
Not really, but just, get in there, chat with us. We're more active there. Well, Lance is off Twitter now. I'm barely on Twitter, so just
it's true.
Much more active on there, or Instagram. Instagram's fine too, but we'd love to chat with you.
I guess Threads is the next thing.
I'll wait till people decide if it's going to be Threads or Blue Sky, and I'll figure it out.
Well, I heard that you link your Instagram account, and if you do want to delete Threads, you have to delete your Instagram account. So I'm waiting for them to iron out the bugs and stuff.
I'm not deleting Instagram.
They did launch it at the right time, whatever.
Yeah. All right, we'll figure it out. All right, folks, thanks again for listening. I know this was a little bit longer episode, but I think, like we mentioned to Josh, super informative. Hope this gives everyone a great starting point for Indian cinema. Night, y'all.
Bye.
कोई यहाँ आहा नाचे नाचे कोई वहाँ आहा नाचे नाचे सारे हंसी आहा नाचे नाचे सारे जवां आहा नाचे नाचे औवा 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 कोई यहाँ नाचे नाचे कोई वहाँ नाचे नाचे सारे हंसी नाचे नाचे सारे जवां नाचे नाचे औवा औवा तुमसे है तुमसे प्यार औवा औवा मानो ना मेरे यार औवा औवा तुमसे है तुमसे प्यार प्यारा है गाना यही गाना बजाना यही तुर तुर तराना बैंग बैंग माने न माने कोई हमने तो माना यही सुनना सुनाना बैंग बैंग किसी का दिल आहा नाचे नाचे किसी की जान आहा नाचे नाचे सारे हंसी आहा नाचे नाचे सारे जवां आहा नाचे नाचे औवा औवा तुमसे है तुमसे प्यार औवा औवा मानो ना मेरे यार औवा औवा तुमसे है तुमसे प्यार दिल को चलाना नहीं कुछ भी छुपाना नहीं झूठा बहाना बैंग बैंग इतनी खुशी है यहाँ जिसका ठिकाना नहीं लूटो खजाना बैंग बैंग कहीं शमा आहा नाचे नाचे कहीं धुआं आहा नाचे नाचे सारे हंसी आहा नाचे नाचे सारे जवां आहा नाचे नाचे औवा औवा तुमसे है तुमसे प्यार औवा औवा मानो ना मेरे यार औवा औवा तुमसे है तुमसे प्यार sweet 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 sweet
La 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 दुनिया दीवानी लगे कितनी सुहानी लगे कर दे जवानी बैंग बैंग गाऊं मैं गीत कोई सबकी कहानी लगे याद ही पुराने बैंग बैंग सारी फिजा
आहा नाचे नाचे
सारा जहां
आहा नाचे नाचे
सारे हंसी
आहा नाचे नाचे
सारे जवां
आहा नाचे नाचे औवा औवा
होके दीवाना नाच
औवा औवा
नाचे जमाना नाच
औवा औवा
होके दीवाना नाच ला
sweet 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 sweet